Oh, right, okay.
I didn't know it was that.
No.
So where have you been?
Just France.
Just France.
Just well, we've got a static caravan.
I suppose it's a bit better than just Frackleton, isn't it?
I bet it was warm.
What I'm doing back here, I don't know.
Talking to us, but
Caravan
no.
that needed draining off.
You love it.
Which part of France, Linda?
Cherbourg Peninsula.
Oh, right, northern France, so more accessible, I guess. Yeah, yeah.
Well, we've reached the bewitching hour. Good morning to you all.
Morning.
Some may appreciate the agenda before us. Can I just advise, I've just mentioned it, that we look at the late observation schedule because it pertains to the enterprise zone at
It's not
Blackpool.
particularly complex, but so I'll cover it in.
No, but it's a change to the written agenda. Right, without further ado, procedural items, declaration of interest. None, thank you. Confirmation of minutes of the meeting which was held on the 6th of October. Is this a correct record? It's been moved and seconded. Thank you. Substitute members, Lindsay.
Yes, Chairman, we should have two this morning. Councillor Jakes, who's here, is substituting for Councillor Thomas, and we should have Councillor Griffiths, who's substituting for Councillor Arnott.
Good morning to you, Angela.
Oh,
Right. Decision items, planning matters. We'll start off with the first application, which is the Blackpool Enterprise Zone. Over to Andrew.
Thank you, Chairman. Morning, everyone. Laser pointer. This is an application at Blackpool Airport Enterprise Zone, which I'm sure we all know where it is, just off, but largely outside of the borough, actually. The application site extends to 13 hectares, so it's quite an extensive area, the majority of which is in Blackpool Borough. This is an application for, it's a bare outline, so just applying for the principle of the use. And the use that they're applying for is an employment development with a new link road that connects from Common Edge Road through to Amy Johnson Way, which is off Squiresgate Lane, for those who don't know. So because it's in both boroughs, they need planning permission from both planning authorities. So this went to Blackpool's committee last week or the week before, who resolved to grant planning permission for it, subject to a call in to the Secretary of State, because the majority of that site's Greenbelt, and then obviously they've applied here today. The officer recommendation in the committee papers is to grant planning permission for it. The late observations asked for that to be revised to allow to delegate the decision to officers. The reason for that is we want to work with Blackpool and the developer to perhaps frame some of the planning conditions in a more flexible way. It's a big site, it's a big scheme, it's going to be developed over many years, so there are some other things like the drainage arrangements, for example, that might be developed on a plot-by-plot basis over time, and I think some of the way the conditions have been drafted in the report don't particularly allow that. I want to be led by Blackpool on it, because the majority of the site is in their area, and the case officer was on leave until yesterday, So we've not been able to have those discussions. So that's a recommendation change in the late obs, as the chairman says. So what is it? Where is it? These are a couple of street view images. So the bit that's in filed is the very southern tip of the site, which is coming up Queensway, and the first picture there is the junction of Division Lane. Second one's just a bit further up where you get to the sports pitch and the access to the garden centre off to the right hand side. On an aerial image, so that's Division Lane, that's the access to the sports pitches, and then you come up Queensway to Common Edge Road, off to School Road, and then this is the Ava Johnson Way here. So if I show that image with the red line boundary, this is the area of development that they're looking to bring forward. So the link road would come from Ava Johnson Way, meanders its way through the site to meet a heavily revised version of Common Edge Road, new junction at School Road, access through here into that, access off this link road to this employment development, which is shown indicatively on this plan here, and then some alterations to the access junctions here, which are the ones that are in filed. So the filed boundary is this blue line that then comes off and comes down Division Lane. So it really is just that bottom end of the site that's within filed. In terms of the phasing of the works, this is how they're proposing to do it. So I might go to the next slide actually, and then go back to that one. So the works that they're looking to do in filed are to improve the operation of these junctions, narrow them down, put right turn lanes in, put pedestrian refuges in, make that area work a bit more effectively. But with this being a bare outline, these are only indicative at this stage. They would need to submit a reserve matters for access to allow all these details to be resolved. But you'll see in the agenda papers, there's been some discussions with Lancashire County Council Highways, who have been looking at it in quite some detail, talking about where the give-way lines go and where all the bus stops are and stuff like that. So I think there's perhaps a little bit more discussion on that, either at this stage or perhaps more properly as part of the reserve matters for access application. Just going back a slide to the phasing. So the red numbers, or the white numbers in the red boxes, show the order of events for doing the works. So you may well be familiar that there's been quite a bit of work going on in that area recently to relocate the sports pitches, which is largely to accommodate this development. So we've enhanced the sports provision. So that's being done as number one. Then they will be doing the junction works here, and then extending the road through and finally connecting it up to the existing network at School Road, where anybody who uses that junction will know it can get a bit chewed up at times. So I think there's some quite extensive changes going on in this area here. I think there's a property being bought.
We normally have that one off.
Yeah, we normally have this one off, Lindsay. There's one on the bottom. I think it's in the middle bottom.
That's better. Is that better for people to see this?
Yeah, I think it's probably easier, isn't it?
Better.
Sorry about that. I'll start again, shall I? I forgot what. Yeah, they're going to buy a property, or a property is being purchased to improve that junction operation as part of this development. No speakers. So just a summary slide as normal. It's a bare outline application. In policy terms, the land that's in file is in the green belt, and part of it is in employment land allocation, specific enterprise zone employment allocation. In terms of the greenbelt elements, engineering works that don't impact on the openness are acceptable, so that complies with greenbelt planning policy. As I said earlier, the Highway Authority have made some comments, and those are moving forward, and they're not seeming to raise any fundamental issues. It's more some of the details of the design. There's no significant drainage, ecology, sports provision issues. One of the features that's going to be infiled is actually a detention basin. So this area here, which I perhaps could have mentioned, is where there's likely to be a drainage pond established to handle some of the drainage, because the works on this road will be designed in an attempt to try and deal with some of the drainage issues that are known in that particular area. The provision of that pond will also allow some ecological habitat to be created there. It's an area that's not very well used, part of the sort of the extent, outer edges of the outfield of the runway. So I think if you can get some ponds and planting and stuff in there instead of just bits of rubbish and old bits of aircraft, then I think it will be an enhancement. So that's all I really have, other than the late observations change, and ask that members delegate it to officers so we can deal with that.
And secondly, I know there have been issues around there with the property on the corner of Division Lane and the fencing, and that appears to have been a problem. So presumably that will be resolved as part of this as well.
Yeah, just dealing with that through you, Chairman, dealing with that latter point, I think the issue has been resolved already. Yeah, the property, which is actually in Blackpool, the property had erected a new fence and enclosed an area, and it was impacting on visibility on for drivers coming out of Division Lane. That fence has been relocated recently, and it's been pushed back and reduced in height. So I think it's perhaps Blackpool Highways that have pressured that.
I did hear that something had been.
Yeah. So I came through there last. I came through there last week, and I think that has been sorted. Your first question was about.
Likely timing.
Oh, timing. Not necessarily imminently, because this is a bare outline, so there will be a need to resolve the reserve matters for access. But I do believe that they are looking to crack on with it. Obviously, they've been doing the sports work for some years, and that was all a precursor for implementing this development. So it would be pointless doing all that work without wanting to proceed with this. So it wouldn't surprise me if we didn't get the reserve matters applications for some elements of it coming in relatively quickly, and then that would obviously allow works to commence in that area. Whether it's before or after the link road, I'm not entirely sure, but I would expect it to be within that kind of time frame.
Oh, okay, and sorry, I'd forgotten to turn my mic on. Secondly, the drainage pond you're talking about there, the riparian drain that runs across Blackpool Road North, which of course we have replaced over the last 18 months. I know there were problems with that further down the line, and it ended up actually within the airport site, and I think that they did do some work. It had been neglected for many years, but I don't know whether you have any idea whether this will assist with I mean, Blackpool Road is vastly improved anyway, but I know there are still issues down the line. So hopefully, if they're looking at the drainage issues, that may well be sorted. But I don't know if you know anything about that sort of detail at this stage.
I must admit, I don't know the specifics, but I do know that the officer who is involved in promoting this scheme is sat at the back actually, is seconded to the enterprise zone from Fylde Council.
Yes.
And
I can speak to him afterwards.
he worked in the engineering technical services team at Fylde Council, involved in the drainage work, the design of the drainage works that you mentioned. So I am sure that there is continuity of the improvements that have been introduced now will not be compromised by the work that takes place here.
Yeah, just you mentioned green belt and the infrastructure doesn't impact, it doesn't matter really on because it's infrastructure. But eventually, will that green belt be impacted if it's going to have big buildings on it?
Not in Files. The Files boundary is this blue line, and then that comes across there, and so it's the south of there where the Files element is. So the works in Files will be limited to widening of carriageways, introducing drainage features into the area of carriageway. The employment development that takes place up here, some of that is in the green belt, and that's something that Blackpool Council need to consider as part of their application. They have considered that and concluded it's fine, and they need to go to the Secretary of State as a referral case because of the scale of it, the scale of the development in Blackpool, and I think that process is ongoing. But in Fylde, that's not an issue because the site area is so small and the works aren't inappropriate anyway. It's not there's no green belt.
Yeah, well, we don't need to worry about it, they do. Yeah.
We don't need to worry about it, they need to worry about it for us, or for themselves.
And the other thing was the drainage pond. That looks like that drainage pond's there already, or has it just been drawn in?
It's just been drawn in.
Oh, right.
Yeah. The
So
land.
I'm interested in what it looked like.
The land. Yeah. The design of it isn't here yet. There will be a planning condition that require details of the depth and capacity and outfalls and all that to be resolved. But it is just shown indicatively on there. They know the application applies for a certain floor space. The application in Blackpool applies for a certain floor space of employment land. So you can make an approximation of the drainage capacity that you need to service that. So that's what they've done, and that's why it fits
quite
in there.
remote from where the building's going to be.
It is. Well, there'll be, yeah. I mean, that is a good point, and that's part of the reason that we're working on the conditions, because each of the individual plots on the site will have its own drainage, and then that will decant into this feature, and then will decant into the brook further down, probably near Kilnhouse Lane, and then carry on down the line. So this.
If it hasn't decanted onto the pitches in the meantime.
Well, presumably some of it will be used to water the pitches in different times. That's part and parcel of the way that the water is reused. But like I said in the answer to Councillor O'Rourke's question, the people behind it are engineers, and they will be bringing hydrologists in to help with the drainage system.
Just that now drainage has always been important, but in the times we're in now and the type of weather we're getting, it's
that's why we're taking on Adam Sugden as the...
and I think I was just talking earlier, and that this road, particularly the link road element, will be designed with swales, so water features on either side of it to help capture the water there. So there is a joined up approach to doing it in a way that I think it's going to be the only road in Blackpool with swales. So it's taking advantage of this perhaps more modern thinking about how to do roads, how to do drainage, and make sure that it's accommodating in the scheme as best as it can be.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
I was going to pick up the drainage issue because, in a sense, we might have a little bit more confidence in this particular scheme than we sometimes have with some drainage schemes because of the juxtaposition of sports pitches. So, in other words, what you've got here are a number of sports pitches, and drainage is a key issue in terms of actually ensuring that they're effective and you can play your games, etc. So that should give us a little bit of a sort of comfort, I think, that actually, you know, there's a real necessity to make sure this works, because the whole point of that area in Fylde is that it's replacing the sporting provision that has been moved down from Blackpool, so it's providing for the local area. That's the first point. The other point, when I read through the report, I was really pleased that one of the things that was highlighted, and Councillor O'Rourke will pick these things up, is that when you look at a big sort of strategically important scheme like servicing the enterprise zone, it's clearly all about doing that. But sometimes we lose sight, because we will look at the impact in terms of the local community first. There may well be additional traffic. You know, some of that traffic will be sort of heavy goods and lorries coming in to service it. And from a ward point of view, from the local community, there's going to be that sort of impact. So you can sometimes be persuaded that this is a big imposition on the local community, it's all going to be negative. There are going to be some negative impacts in terms of activity, but that could be relieved as well by the M55 link road, which all comes into this, you know, in terms of how much traffic you have. But actually there are benefits to the local community, because this, you know, I know it very well. I use this section of road probably more than any other section locally. And it can be horrendous in terms of accessing the garden centre, getting in, getting out of Division Lane, because most people will be aware that the bottom, it's a cul-de-sac, because Blackpool have closed off Division Lane at the other end of Midland Road. I used to actually live on the Moss for a couple of years when I first came to this part of the world, so I know it quite well. And when you look at the amount of traffic on Queensway and coming down School Road at the moment, which will be relieved to some extent by that link road, there are huge logistical problems there in terms of the traffic dynamics. What this will do is enable 2 right turns going towards Blackpool, 1 into Division Lane and 1 into the garden centre. But also coming from the other way, it'll provide a right-hand lane turn-off access into the sports village, which is at the top of Division Lane, where that road goes across. There's a name for it, but I can't remember it now. Moss something Lane. You know, the one that goes up towards the cricket club, the one that runs across, where you've got 1 there.
It's Division Lane West, though.
Is that Division Lane West? Okay. Well, that particular road, but what I'm saying is, as traffic comes south, you know, from Blackpool, that's one of the components of this scheme, isn't it? Is that you have this, because that is what stops a lot of the traffic flow at the moment, because it's really difficult for people who live on Division Lane. And by the way, one side of Division Lane is Blackpool, one side of Division Lane is Fylde. So it actually affects Fylde residents here in terms of their access and their quality of life. In terms of moving around, it will help local residents actually. They'll be able to take advantage of these changes and improvements. And it's just worth putting that in, because sometimes we look at the big scheme and go, is it, you know, what are the benefits, what are the negative impacts? We sometimes forget actually that although there are some negative impacts in terms of the size of the development, etc., there are also benefits from local communities, because it's actually sorting out a lot of issues that local residents, as Councillor O'Rourke would probably be able to affirm, you know, are very concerned about. So, you know, you've got the pedestrian refuge and 1 or 2 other things as well. So just to point out, there can be benefits in a micro community with big schemes, as well as the more obvious, maybe some negative ones in terms of sort of congestion and everything else. Okay?
Hand over to Andrew,
Yeah.
and then proceed to the vote.
Yeah, just picking up on Councillor Radcliffe's point there, this is the area he references where they've got the right turn. So there's a plan in the scheme to bring a right turn in a ghost island in the middle of a carriageway to facilitate right turns without obstructing the straight-on traffic. This is a pedestrian island. At the minute we've got pedestrian cycle route on the western side of Queensway going north. It's very difficult to get across at that point to get onto Division Lane and the perhaps recreational routes that lead from there. So there's an opportunity here that will benefit people to make that crossing safer and make it more readily accessible to use pedestrians and cycle links that are accessible across the Moss from there.
The amended recommendation was moved by Councillor David O'Rourke and seconded by Councillor Stan Trudgill. All in favour of that recommendation, approved recommendation? That's unanimous, thank you. Can we move on to the two remaining items on this morning's agenda, both simply on the agenda because of disconnect between Blackpool, St Anne's Town Council and our planning department. Wallington Road.
I'm not quite sure that's 100%. Which one we're doing first? Wallington Road. Right, Waddington Road, residential area of St Anne's, so it's kind of between the golf course and Harehouses Lane. It's a two-storey building which was built as flats, and this application relates to the upper floor flat in the building, which is proposed to be the development's proposed is the installation of a dormer to the rear roof slope. Now, if that was on a house, it would be permitted development, but because flats don't benefit from permitted development rights, they need planning permission for it. The Town Council have objected to the application as they believe that it conflicts with the design criteria in the neighbourhood plan. So, taking on board some of the peer review feedback, I went back to the Town Clerk to see if I could sort of draw that out a little bit more, and they've restated their position, which I've put in the committee report just to clarify where they're coming from on that. The officer's recommendation here is to grant planning permission, notwithstanding their views. So what is the scheme? Well, existing and proposed elevations. So it's the first floor flat, looking to put that dormer on the rear roof slope. In terms of accommodation, that provides an additional bedroom and shower. So it's currently a two-bedroom flat, and this would make it also into two-bedroom flat, but with two larger bedrooms due to the way that the accommodation is altered. So where is it? So it's this slightly unusual location. You access it through this sort of relatively narrow access, and there's a series of flats that back onto an area here where you've got a series of garages. I've got some pictures which will show that, and then it fronts out onto the playing fields, but the dormer's on the rear, so it faces into this sort of enclave of development, if you will. No speakers. So this is the building. So it's this one here. So the dormer goes where the red splodge is. That's a view down the access. So you can see it really is just an access that serves those flats. And where it is, this picture is where it sits from the street. So the building's at the end of this alleyway, and in the wider street scene, the alleyway is just behind that white car. So it's between, this picture is between those two buildings. So where the Town Council are understandably talking about dormers not being attractive features in the street scene, I'm not sure this is particularly visible in the street scene is perhaps the point I'm looking at here. Moving on from that point, there are many, this is the other side of the road, and further down, so that building there under that red line, is this 2- and 3-storey building with a flat roof, and then the other side of the road you've got these properties with dormers on them, which are obviously part of the design, but they are also flat roof dormers that are obviously quite prominent in that street. So I can understand where the parish council, the town council, sorry, are coming from in terms of the principle of a flat roof dormer isn't as an attractive feature, but I think in this particular context and given its discrete location, I can't see that we could reach a view that it is harmful to the character of the area or out of character with that character. And that's why the office recommendation is for approval.
Okay, so not that I entirely agree with the final town council wording, but what I do agree with is that dormers should be subservient to the property and certainly to the ridge, and this seems to be common across most councils, that certainly to ridge height, the dormer height is subservient. In this case, it's not subservient, and the reason is the roof is of a very low pitch, so it's not really capable of taking a dormer. It doesn't have enough angle on it. So there's not enough height to be, and if you want, I mean, I look round, there are no other rear dormers on any of those other properties, and you know, in that area, the view of that property is by 18 other properties, direct view from the in that square, so they all see over that, of which there's about 22, but some of the trees are in the way of some of them. But I just think that the fact that it doesn't, you know, that it's not subservient and it is right up to the roof ridge means that this would be a start of a build to your ridge and have a flat block on the back of your house. And it's just, I don't find that, it's not attractive and definitely not in the idea of a dormer being subservient to a, so on design and visual, you know, effect, I believe it's poor and I can't support it personally. So. Okay, that's my...
Thank you, David.
Thank you, Chairman. I mean, I live in this area, walk my dogs on that park, so I know the property. I can actually tell Councillor Trudgill where there's a house behind us that's got a dormer like that, on both sides of it, actually. But, and with respect to Councillor Trudgill, the architectural merit of most of the properties in this area are questionable, and I say that as somebody who lives around there. So, as Andrew pointed out, that although these are purpose-built flats, to all intents and purposes, they look like terraced houses, a terrace of houses. If there were houses, they'd have permitted development rights, and I'm bearing in mind it's sort of at the rear of property and effectively a garage and servicing area. I just can't really see it, so I would have to say that I would quite happily propose that the permission is granted.
I just want to come... Yeah, thanks, Chairman. I just want to come back to say that it's just the fact of the subservience of the dormer to the ridge height, which is a common across most councils, that they won't accept those because of the actual visual effect from a distance, because it's right at the top of the building and you'll see it from all directions in most cases. And although this may be a fairly sheltered area, if this was to happen in other areas, well, I'll leave everyone to think about what that would look like for a box dormer.
Yeah, I certainly take Councillor Trudgill's point. You know, it is to the ridge, factually correct. Yeah, due to the like I said, due to the construction of the property, it is up to the ridge. It's also factually the case, as Councillor O'Rourke says, that it would be permitted development if it weren't flat. It is flat, so we do need to assess the merits of it. I do think that the character of that area, it's not one where this is going to be highly visible. I don't think it does particularly set a precedent that would require us to approve more visually harmful dormers, because I think when we've looked at it, we've had to look at it in line with the Town Council's neighbourhood plan and our policies that take a view of the character of the area. And the character of the area is one where there are quite a lot of, it's as a consequence of the age it was developed, there are quite a lot of flat-roofed properties and flat-roofed dormers on properties. So I don't believe that this is creating any, it's introducing a harmful precedence that would mean, you know, if we had a more attractive property in a different part of St Anne's where we had a similar proposal to this, we would be duty bound to approve it, because I think we would try and take a balanced, or we would need to take a balanced approach of the character of that particular area and see how this and see how any other proposals sat in that context. Yeah, Council. Yeah, we do. We have a supplementary planning document, which is a.
Quite new then, isn't it?
No, it's something that dates back from 2007. So it is probably overdue for a review, but it does have a series of design notes for different types of house extensions, and it does include reference to how dormers should be situated, and it refers to particularly when on the front elevation. That they are designed to not dominate the roof, not sit up to the ridge, wherever possible have pitched roofs, be constructed in materials to match the roof. So there is a series of tests that we would look to try and enforce on any assessment of a dormer. Happened to my tea issues. Just give me 1 second. This looks so professional, doesn't it? Right. So the property, this is Google Maps, Google Street View. So the property in question is here. So the application site is down that alleyway. The shops in question are here. So you've got this two-storey block of a two-storey here and then three-storey there with the spa shop and what have you in it. Then if we spin round this way, we've got a series of sort of chalet bungalow type properties, many of which have got dormers which clearly don't go to the ridge height, as Councillor Trudgill highlighted earlier, but many of which are flat roofed and presumably built with the properties given the similarity of their scale. So it was kind of with that context that I took the view, or the case officer took the view, and I agreed that whilst if the dormer was on the front, we'd be having a different discussion, I think, because it would be more visible around here, around that area of open space where well used by local dog walkers, I believe. In fact, there's flat roofs here, isn't there? So there's all those flat roofs there, as well as that's the back of the Spar shop with that I showed you earlier. So I think there is that context of flat roofs, but this is to the rear into this kind of cul-de-sac courtyard where it's just garages and access ways. So that was kind of where I was coming from in terms of the context, Councillor.
I just want to, in a way, I'm going to be supporting this on balance. I think we should. But I'm actually going to thank Councillor Tredgill for his contribution this morning, because in a way, what he has pointed out perhaps gives us a little insight into why the town council have taken this particular position. Because it does throw up this business as well, is that all the other dormer bungalows are on the next floor, and this, I haven't seen any evidence of third level, and they're squeezing this in. I suppose the two critical things for me, which is why I'll be supporting it, notwithstanding some of those concerns, but I just want to say in the committee's context, it's really useful to have these arguments put forward so that we're aware of all the other sort of factors that come into when we're making these judgments. But one, I think, Andrew just mentioned this, is that it's a rear dormer, but also the fact, for me, one of the critical things was that it appears to overlook this service area with garages, etc. Not a very attractive area, I have to say, rather than backing straight on to a residential garden with houses up. And I think that's where I've been coming from here, is that when I actually had a drive down as well, I had a look around, and I'm looking in terms of the impact on the amenity of other residences, it is less than it would be because of a not very nice area that it's actually overlooking. But I just wanted to say, I think we should pay credit for some of the comments you made, and it makes you think, but I will be voting for it. Yeah.
Right, it's been moved and seconded, moved by Councillor David O'Rourke and Councillor Heather Speake, seconded. All in favour of approval, please show. Those against? 2 against. Clearly carried, thank you. And now can we move on to Harrogate Road, single storey side and rear extension. Again, the reason being on this morning's agenda, it was at the recommendation of the officers is at variance with the Town Council's observations.
Okay, that's correct. This is not very far away. That's the Spar shop, so we're just round the corner. Harrogate Road. So this is a detached dormer bungalows, one of the dormer bungalows that I was showing you earlier. This is also off a cul-de-sac, this time one that only has 2 properties on it. And the proposal is to demolish a single-storey garage, flat roof garage to the side, and add an extension in its place, which is also flat roofed, but is slightly larger in terms of how it projects forward on the property. The Town Council have objected to this again on design basis, and the officer recommendation is notwithstanding that for approval. So the property is here. So this is the school, Clifton Primary School playing field, playground and open space area. The access is down here. So we've got this property, and then there's this one other property that are accessed off that cul-de-sac. Looking at the property from the cul-de-sac, so you can see it's a detached house. It's had various extensions to it, and the proposal is to replace this garage with a single-storey extension. This picture is just in the back garden, so you can see that garage projects behind the rear elevation already. So this is a comparison of the existing and proposed footprints. So that picture I've showed you of the back garden shows how it projects beyond the rear, and it's just over half the depth of the property. The proposal is to bring it forward so it's almost the full depth of the property with a slightly squared off and slightly greater projection to the rear. So it's going to provide a garage and then an additional ensuite master bedroom, I suppose, for the property. So these are the existing and proposed elevations from the front. So obviously that's a very square-on view. You can see the proportions are relatively similar in terms of how it looks from the front to the existing arrangement. In terms of the assessment of it, that's the picture I showed you before. So that's one of the properties on the cul-de-sac. This is the other. So this has also been extended in various ways over time. Also has a very similar flat-roofed extension to its side elevation with other dormer and other extensions to it. This is the view down that cul-de-sac. So again, a bit like the last one where it's slightly wider cul-de-sac this time, but it does only serve those two properties. So in terms of the general street scene, the only context you're going to see it in is of the property on the previous image, the two properties on the previous image that I showed you. Again, this image shows how it relates to neighbours on the sort of the main part of Harrogate Road. So you can see that these back onto it, and it's got this sort of reasonable hedging along the boundary. The back garden of this property actually backs onto an pedestrian access to the school. So there will be some change in that aspect, but there is a timber fence, which is what you're looking at here, which separates users of that pedestrian school access from the site of it. So in reality, the impact to the users of that pedestrian access is going to be very limited. I think that's been a bit more. This is from Street View 10 years ago, so I think it's been gated off since then. So again, it's in the settlement where extensions are supported. The design is again very similar to the last one, where the design might not be something that we would necessarily be ideally supportive of, but there are some mitigating factors here in terms of its similarity to the existing arrangements. The design being better than what's there at the moment, so if we were to refuse it, we'd end up with the existing staying there. The property is discreetly sited, so it's not going to affect the wider character, and the typing mistakes there, and the views from the rear are very limited. In terms of neighbour relationships, there's no particular impact. There are some short gardens to the properties at the side, but the relationship is one that is going to be acceptable given the existing context. There's no parking or other issues. I've discussed the character issues that the Town Council raised, so the recommendation is to grant planning permission.
Thank you.
My only comment with this one is that I think it's mentioned in the report under views of St Anne's Town Council that there wasn't a chance to go back to Kevin. I have no issue with this whatsoever, and I just thought to say I'm not. I pick my. I don't see anything here.
You want to second?
Nothing to say. Yeah. No, I won't second. Well,
It was a yes, but no.
I'll second.